Once again, Alberta's NDP is acting more like a doormat for Ottawa than a watchdog for Alberta. This time surrendering to their allies, the Trudeau Liberals, on equalization. As you know, equalization has Albertans, through their federal taxes, contributing about $3 billion to subsidize public services in other parts of the country, including those that are doing better economically. And it's part of an overall system that has Alberta taxpayers contributing a net of about $20 billion to the rest of the country, even during the recent deep downturn. To add insult to injury, the Trudeau Liberals have snuck through Parliament a 5-year extension of the unfair equalization rules that Saskatchewan and Newfoundland were fighting to change. The real question is, what was Alberta's NDP government doing? Well, as usual, surrendering from day one to their close allies, the Trudeau Liberals. All the way back in August of 2015, shortly after the NDP took office, their finance minister, Joe Ceci, said that he was, quotes, agnostic on the question of equalization, of how Alberta is having to pay massively for public services elsewhere. Then in November of 2016, the then Wildrose official opposition brought forward a motion calling for a plan to fight for a fair equalization deal, a motion that was opposed by the NDP. Then in November of last year, our United Conservative official opposition brought forward a similar motion calling on the government to immediately begin aggressive preparations for the 2019 equalization renegotiations and to update the Assembly on those preparations. Again, the NDP opposed that common sense motion to get ready for renegotiations. And Premier Notley replied,
"We will not be following the lead of the UCP on the matter of equalization."
So, in other words, we were calling for the last 2 years on the NDP to get ready for the planned renegotiation of equalization that was supposed to happen over the course of the next year, but they didn't. They opposed it. They surrendered, yet again, to the Trudeau Liberals. Now, here's where this gets really curious. In March of this year, Trudeau's finance minister, Bill Morneau, sent a letter to his Saskatchewan counterpart, Donna Harpauer, basically saying that the federal government preferred to keep the current rules in place, but implying that negotiations were still open. Here's the problem. On May 15th, Bill Morneau wrote a letter to the NDP Alberta Finance Minister, Joe Ceci, in which he said, quotes, "The equalization program is being renewed in legislation." So he didn't tell Saskatchewan this, but he did tell Alberta this. So Premier Scott Moe of Saskatchewan put together a credible plan to get a fair deal on equalization for Alberta and Saskatchewan. He announced it just last week. But Joe Ceci, Rachel Notley, the Alberta NDP, didn't say boo. They didn't want to reveal they'd been given the inside track by the federal Liberals on renegotiating equalization because the Alberta NDP didn't want to fight for a fair deal. This is bizarre. We have an Alberta government, and now Joe Ceci is claiming that he has been a passionate advocate for reform of equalization. Really? You call surrendering passionate advocacy, Minister? I'm sorry, folks. This is another clear example of why we need to replace this fumbling NDP government who seems to think that surrendering to Justin Trudeau's attack on this province is how to stand up for Alberta. They could not be more wrong. But I've got news for Prime Minister Trudeau. A future United Conservative government is not going to take your effort to jam this down the province's throats without a fight. If you don't guarantee us the construction of a coastal pipeline, if you insist on inflicting your national carbon tax on Alberta after we scrap the NDP punitive carbon tax, well, we're going to hold a referendum in this province. We're going to trigger binding constitutional negotiations as promised by the Supreme Court of Canada in its Quebec secession reference 20 years ago by allowing Albertans to vote on Section 36 of the Constitution on equalization. We're going to force the federal government to the table. We're going to take a page out of the playbook of Quebec political leaders, and we are going to have an Alberta government that stands up for and defends fairness in the Canadian Federation.